Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 2nd, 2020, and today I'm going to be taking a look at Texas's 2nd Congressional District. So if you're wondering why I'm making this video, it is a member-decided video. If you don't know what that is, there's pretty much a join button right next to my subscribe button on my YouTube channel. Pretty much it outlines how you can get your own individual video about a certain topic that you'd like. For this video, I'm going to be discussing this 2nd district. So I do plan on covering some more contentious districts in the future. I do expect that a number of congressional races will be deemed important by things such as the Cook Political Report or CNN, or just overall indicative of how the Democrats will likely perform on the presidential level based off their House results. We're looking at a very similar landscape from 2018. Obviously, it's the same House map, but we're also seeing the same voting blocks voting in the same exact margin based off the data we have today. So putting that all aside, we're looking at a slightly competitive district in around, I guess, the suburbs of Houston. And this is the state of Texas. It traditionally isn't a Democratic state or really a competitive state, but obviously congressional districts are much more individualized and aren't always a great indicator of how the state will vote. But this state actually was pretty solid for the Republicans in the past. Since the year 2004, including the redistricting, Ted Poe was the Republican incumbent, and he pretty much held this seat up until 2018. And Dan Crenshaw essentially took over from that point in time. Dan Crenshaw wasn't exactly the Republican Party's favorite in Texas, more so the Republican Party's favorite nationwide. He became a really quick national figure. He's a veteran. He has a lot behind his name, at least on the conservative side. And when we look at him as a candidate, well, arguably, he was a pretty strong one, I will say, a very vocal, I would say very well known now amongst the, not the Tea Party movement, the Republican Party. I don't know why I said Tea Party movement, but, well, he did have an issue with that, but we'll discuss that in a bit. I've actually heard him speak before in person. So I will say that he definitely has a presence that to a point where there's, 200 Republican representatives, and he was one of them that spoke. He probably will make this race a little bit more competitive. He's very outspoken. This race is probably shaping up to be a little bit closer than in the past. In 2018, despite the Democratic Party doing very well in the United States Senate in Texas and on the nationwide map, Dan Crenshaw defeated his Democratic opponent with 53% of the vote to the Democrats' 46%. But if we're working with the same type of voting block, literally the same type of voting block, with the same generic ballot lead for the Democratic Party, we very well could see this race narrow up from where it was just 2 years ago. And the reason for that is the fact that Joe Biden likely will carry Democrats down ballot. We're talking about a congressional district that has voted for the Republican Party 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, but then narrowed up in 2016. Well, why is that? Well, 2016, it narrowed up because President Trump was not liked too much, especially by Republicans in the suburban areas. We're talking about Romney and McCain and Bush Republicans, especially in suburban areas that have since moved over to the Democratic Party or just voted third party. If you take a look, Hillary Clinton actually got a larger margin, a larger portion of the vote than Obama both times, than Kerry, than Gore. And the reason for that isn't because Hillary Clinton was more popular. We all know that's not true. It's because Donald Trump pushed away a lot of these Republicans. So if we're seeing someone such as Dan Crenshaw, who actually in the past was critical of President Trump, who has now obviously fully embraced him, we could see him at a little bit of a threat for the possibility of him losing his race. And again, we're looking at the same district that voted for Ted Cruz, not for Ted Cruz, the same state that voted for Ted Cruz by a very narrow margin. If we're looking at the overall state of Texas right now, let's take a look at where it was not the regular numbers. Let's take a look at where it was 2 years ago in the Senate race. In Texas, Ted Cruz led Beto O'Rourke. Wow, Beto O'Rourke. Wow, I cannot believe he was just a recent figure in politics, but it's so well known now. Beto O'Rourke had 45% of the vote, according to polling data, had roughly 51% of the vote for Ted Cruz. And then on Election Day, Ted Cruz underperformed his margin, very narrowly though, but Beto O'Rourke increased in terms of the overall vote share. He was expected to get 45% of the vote share. He got 48%. That's pretty significant. This was a very close race. It was not supposed to be. Ted Cruz led throughout the entire campaign season. He never really had a double-digit lead, but he had a 7-point lead and still only ended up winning by 3%. Now, Donald Trump is losing to Joe Biden in Texas by roughly a percentage point if you round up, or half a percentage point to be exact. And that is not a good sign whatsoever. For Joe Biden to be at 0.6% ahead of Donald Trump in Texas, when Ted Cruz, this is the most notable statewide race. It wasn't the governor race. It was the Senate race. For Ted Cruz to have been up 7% and then underperformed pretty drastically. Well, that's pretty significant. We're talking about a Senate race that should not have been competitive. Ted Cruz is a very well-known candidate. And then in 2016, the Republicans underperformed the data as well. In 2016, Trump led by 12% on Election Day and ended up only winning by 9%. So can you imagine a 3-point swing, which is exactly what we saw in 2018, and then exactly what we're seeing, what we saw in 2016, apply that to 2020 data, Biden wins Texas. So for this district, Biden would have to flip to the Democratic Party. Biden would probably have to win the state of Texas. Now, months ago, I would have said that was completely impossible. Now, it's a very real possibility. Looking at the results in this district itself in the past, pretty much has been a Republican stronghold. Dan Crenshaw, yes, this was a Democratic wave year. I understand that. But 2020 is also shaping up to be, and possibly even better for the Democratic Party. Democrats only increase their House margins in presidential election years, even if Republicans end up winning the overall presidential election. The Democratic Party, for whatever reason, does better when there's increased turnout, and Democrats do worse when turnout decreases. The Republican Party won both of their wave elections with, at most, 40% turnout nationwide. The Democratic Party saw nearly presidential election turnout in 2018, which is what led them to victory in the House of Representatives. So if we're entering into 2020 with the same type of energy as 2018 for the Democratic Party, and then a much better margin in Texas than what we've seen in the past, that absolutely could be moving around voters in this specific area. This is a perfect example of Republican voters defecting from President Trump. We're talking about a major city, Houston, Texas. Okay, we're talking about an area that is always discussed as whether or not the Democratic Party can run up the numbers here to offset for the hundreds of other Republican counties. And most of the time, that does happen. You know, these big cities drive the Democratic Party's possibility of even winning statewide races in Texas. We're talking about Dallas and Houston and San Antonio and Austin and El Paso. And in 2018, Beto O'Rourke did very well. But Joe Biden is outperforming Beto O'Rourke amongst all of the margins that Beto O'Rourke did significantly better than Hillary Clinton, which means Biden might be at a position to even win the state. So I don't think Dan Crenshaw will lose in 2020. I think he will probably hold on to the seat, but I expect the race to narrow up without a doubt. Looking at the ratings based off of Ballotopedia, likely and solid Republican seems to be how it's rated right now. But if we take a look at where it is from, Politico and a number of other pollsters and political analytic companies, it's either likely or lean. Most of the time it's likely, and then it's lean, and then safe does have two characterizations from Real Clear Politics and then Inside Elections, but I'm surprised Real Clear Politics actually considers it to be safe, considering that they do try to play it safe most of the time. But we could very well see a possibility of this race being competitive. Now, Dan Crenshaw wasn't exactly the favorite when he first ran. If we take a look at his election data, he actually ran in an original primary that went off into a runoff, considering that no candidate got 50%. He wasn't the initial pick. But if we take a look at the runoff, the person who won over him, Kevin Roberts, actually got less votes the second time than when he ran against Dan Crenshaw the first time. I think they said Kathleen Wall was endorsed by Ted Cruz and Governor Greg Abbott, then ended up losing to Dan Crenshaw by a couple hundred votes, and then Crenshaw ended up winning the runoff. And this had to do a lot with the fact that he was getting a lot of media attention. Tom Cotton from Arkansas endorsed him. He went on Fox Business. So Dan Crenshaw was able to get a very quick rise to fame. And then he has been speaking at a number of conservative events. I think he could be a notable figure in the future, possibly discussed as a 2024 candidate. But, looking at his 2018 race, it was close, but it's also a Republican district. It has a partisan voting index of around 11% in favor of the Republican Party. And also looking at the demographics, yes, around a third of the voters here are Hispanic voters and 13% are black voters, but that still doesn't make the race super competitive. The plurality of voters are white voters. And this is not to say Hispanic voters are absolutely as lopsided as black voters are for the Democratic Party. Black voters split 90-9 for the Democratic Party. Hispanic voters are roughly 65-35. And if we're talking about the different types of Hispanic voters, sometimes the Republicans actually end up on top. For example, Cuban Hispanic voters in Florida. So with white voters as the plurality, and Hispanic voters probably won't be driving up the turnout in this state. Yes, Joe Biden could do very well, and that would be on the backs of Hispanic voters and change suburban districts. I do think it's possible for Biden to do well in this second district, but I don't expect him to carry the state at all. At this point, I still think that Trump will narrowly edge it out, and I don't think Dan Crenshaw will lose. But Biden definitely could be significantly outperforming Hillary Clinton, which could narrow up this race. But I still don't see that tipping point to a point where Dan Crenshaw could actually lose in this 2nd district. It is possible for things to narrow up, but I think after this election, he probably will be a safe incumbent as we proceed, because the Democratic Party is doing around the same on the generic ballot, which means we probably will see a similar margin to 2018, just with increased Democratic vote share, given that Joe Biden will be on the ticket and probably will be outperforming Hillary Clinton by a significant margin in this state to a point where he could possibly even win. And even if Biden wins in the 2nd district, Dan Crenshaw still could possibly lose. Keep in mind, in 2016, when Hillary Clinton narrowed up the margin, or when Donald Trump narrowed up the margin, because he did win that state, down to 9%, the incumbent Republican still won by over 20%. 25% of the vote difference between the Republican and the Democrat in a presidential election year. Now, this is because Ted Poe was the incumbent, and Dan Crenshaw also has very similar qualities to President Trump, but I don't think that it's enough to put him down and have a Democrat gain in this seat, but the Democratic Party definitely can outperform where they were 2 years ago. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of your screen, there is also a Discord link that you can go ahead and put into your browser, and it'll bring you to the invite, and then you can join the server. And there's another video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2020 election videos all together. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.